Okay. Hello, welcome everybody. I'm David Grossman and I'm filling in for Navtaj Chandok. This is a professional real estate investors group, PREIG, Navtaj group that he's been running for probably decades now, at least a couple of decades. And we have a great team of uh, experts, panelists, friends, co-hosts. And we also have a presentation, which I'm going to try and bring back on the screen now. Um, and we'll work from that. And let's get this baby started. So our experts are Randy Goodman, Jyoti Chowdhury, Jerry Hogenhout. We have a guest tonight, Howard Landau, because I know there was a slide on bankruptcies, and Howard's a trustee in bankruptcy, so I invited him to come on and comment on that. Let me just adjust this. There we are. Allow recording. Okay, very good. So let's get this started here. Slides. So I think you all know this is like, I guess you'd call this the real estate light, and then Navtaj does these special training sessions. There's one coming up this weekend, and there's a slide on that where you can do a deeper dive. But I've been part of this group now for probably a couple years, ever since COVID started. And it's been fun. Met some great people and done some business, and I always enjoy working with Navtash. So here's a disclaimer, always provided. So if you tonight's discussion is not to be construed as advice. This is uh, informational purposes only, and use with care. Um, but do call the experts to ask for more detail after the session. Everybody who speaks tonight will put up their phone number if it's not already up, and you should definitely lean on them. Here's the group here. They were meeting at the, I think this was the Prince Hotel. Um, who would remember this? They were meeting weekly at York Mills and Leslie. I think it was the Prince Hotel. Vladimir, you would remember. I see you right in the front. It was the Prince Hotel, was it not?
Yes, it was.
Okay. So they were meeting there once a month, and I just started attending, and then COVID hit, and then everybody took to the internet, and here we are. Right. Okay, very good. So looking at some of the stats, quite remarkable. If you look on the left side of the slide here, you look since 2016 how immigration has increased from previous years, an average of 600,000 per year. And last year, 2023, unbelievable, 1.2 million, incredible numbers. And what are Canadians most concerned about? If you look on the right side, number one, rising cost of living. We're all seeing the effects of inflation. Number two, housing affordability. That is a big one, and that's part of our mandate to talk about that and the opportunities that come out of it. And I'm not going to read them all to you, but you can see there's a lot of things. But overall, when you think of all that's happening in the world, we've got a pretty good country here still, and that would explain why so many people want to move here to Canada. And moving along, this is why I invited Howard Lando. He's a bankruptcy trustee in actually the proper name is I think now licensed insolvency trustee, a lit LIT. And we used to do webinars with Howard when COVID started, and we kept saying, Howard, what's happening? Is everybody going bankrupt because nobody was going to work? And they weren't going bankrupt. Howard, tell us what happened and why are we seeing now, finally, not that we are happy to see bankruptcies at startling rates, but why suddenly do we see the numbers going up?
Well, I think it's just like anything in COVID, everything was out of whack. So bankruptcy was no exception. So during normal times, a certain percentage of businesses will fail, a certain number of individuals will be overwhelmed with debt and need to hit the reset button. When COVID hit, people thought that meant that everybody would be falling into debt and everybody would need to hit the reset button. But instead, government programs and policies of collections from banks and other lenders made it very, very rare that somebody felt the need to seek help from a trustee. So trustees saw what I would say the lowest number of filings in history that I can. Well, most people are saying that in terms of how much population there was. So nobody was really going bankrupt, which sounds very odd. But in that context, what's going on now is just a restoring to normal levels of people requiring help or businesses falling through the cracks. So it looks like a storm and an increase, but if you ask me, it's just a return to what normally happens in a capitalist economy. And so
Okay,
that's what's
right,
happening.
right. So the gravy train is basically over now, would you say?
Yes,
I mean, we've seen the effects of all those handouts in terms of translating to inflation,
exactly.
which has caused its own set of problems. But I guess the gravy train is perhaps over now.
Yeah, and the best way to just to use by way of examples are always a great way to cases and examples. The best way to sort of see how the world runs, how the world operates. But the best example could be the government asking for people to pay back their $2,000 a month payments, which they gave out willy nilly, and now it's time to not. It's time to call those back, and people are feeling that they're looking for help. Banks have decided no more breaks. They're using the courts. They're enforcing collections, and we're just seeing what I would say a normal amount of activity. To boot, you're seeing a lot of corporate insolvencies. It's not my specializing area, but I'm close enough to it. I deal with the individuals who are suffering from failed corporations, but there's a whole whack of corporate insolvencies simply for the same reason. For a number of years during COVID, there was no pressure on these companies to make a decision. And now that the economy is sort of restored to what it's supposed to look like, plus all the problems that are going with it, we are seeing a massive amount of corporate restructurings, corporate bankruptcies, uh, as much as there's ever been. And that's just part, to my knowledge and my understanding, is just a reset.
Okay, good information. Thank you, Howard. Friends, if you know somebody who's in a pinch and needs some advice from insolvency trustee, Howard is your guy. Howard, please, if you haven't already, please put your contact information in the comments so that people can get a hold of you. That would
Will do.
be
In the
appreciated. Thanks,
chat.
and thanks for being with us on short notice today.
No, I'm glad
Um,
to appreciate the call. As I said, anybody feel has any questions, I'm happy to share my views. Thank you, Dick.
Th- Thank you very much, Howard. So here's a cute little house, half a house. This is Navtaj's presentation. He puts these presentations, puts a lot of time into this every month. Um, I wonder if anybody's got the background on this. I mean, it's kind of funny how they've made it looks like it was originally a single family home. It looks more almost like a cottage, and they thought, hey, let's change the face, you know, the lipstick basically, and to make it look like it's completely different, but it's pretty obviously this looks like an old single family home. And you see a lot of these, well, not these in particular, but smaller and smaller spaces, condos especially, teeny tiny condos. And this one was listed for 499, half a house. It didn't say the square footage, um, but 12 and a half feet wide. I did look it up. It's on blog TO if anyone's curious. Blog TO 121 Coxwell, and a nice looking house inside actually. But that's what you get, half a house for 627,000 in Toronto.
Well,
Um,
they created semis out of it.
right, that makes sense. Yeah, so they created two titles out of a single
Mhm.
tiny cottage in downtown
Mhm.
Toronto. Interesting. Why not? Thanks, Randy. Um, okay, let's see. Let's go back. I'm trying to read what this says. My toolbar is blocking it. Uh, sorry, guys. Can somebody read that?
Hundreds.
Hundreds of thousands of Canadians are leaving Toronto for other parts of Canada. In the past 2 years, 220,000 more Canadians have abandoned Ontario's than arrived, according to Statistics Canada's domestic migration data.
Yeah, so thanks, Randy. Interesting, because I think 40% of the people who land, traditionally, 40% of the people who land to new immigrants to Canada land in Toronto. And I'd always heard that they are, gradually moving out from Toronto, but I didn't know that we were seeing this much migration from Ontario to other provinces. But we've talked a lot about on previous calls opportunities in Calgary, and I know people who are moving out east. Any of the panelists want to jump in from their own personal experience or knowledge about where is everybody going, and is this really true? I mean, it's pretty amazing that we're seeing this many leave Ontario, Toronto after landing in Toronto.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
go to the Maritimes, they go to uh, Edmonton, Calgary, they Alberta's better price, Nova Scotia's better price. It's cheaper to live out there.
Anywhere but here.
I don't mind jumping in
Almost.
here, David.
BC's
Sure,
crazy.
sure,
I've
sure,
got
sure.
not only clients leaving Toronto, in my tax practice, I'm getting very busy with people gathering information to leave Canada. So
Yeah.
not only are they leaving Toronto to go east and west, they're also wanting to go out of Canada. So that's I've never been that busy in that area uh, forever. So yeah, people are abandoning not only Toronto but Canada too.
Now, are
I
they fully abandoning Canada, or are they just taking up a second residence, like
Well,
in
they're
Dominican?
exploring just a lot of information gathering. How does it work? What happens? So there are a lot of gathering of information. Yes, it's becoming a little more common to have that second residence outside of Canada to have that option if that's where your life goes. So we're seeing a little more of that, people having an interest to invest outside of Canada, not just so much for the investment opportunities, but to have some personal use inside of that investment opportunity with the possibility of one day saying, hey, I'm going to move here. I do a bit of business on the north side of Dominican, and I can tell you the amount of Canadian expats that are there is unbelievable. Like I'm blown away by the amount of Canadians that either reside there 6 months of the year or completely full time have left Canada. And it's not just elderly Canadians. I'm talking to couples in their 30s with two kids that are living full time in Dominican. So it's interesting.
Yeah, thanks,
uh,
Jerry. Jyoti, did you want to weigh in on this?
yes, I believe people are moving to places where there are better business opportunities. Maybe the US, maybe even India, maybe Saudi. So people are trying to tap the world market and see where there are good business opportunities for them to explore.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks, Jyoti.
I second
You're
that
welcome.
because to add to my comments again, as Jody says, you're exploring areas not just for personal reasons, but for business reasons. You know, business, you know, it's not easy in Canada. I mean, it's easy for some of us, it's not easy for others, and there are better business climates elsewhere. So yeah, I agree. That's a good comment. People are also looking just for their business ventures to look outside of Canada.
Okay, very good. So moving along. Can you purchase city-owned property for a loonie? Well, okay, so here's the commercial for the masterclass, which takes place this weekend, this Saturday, um, July the 13th. So snap a photo of that uh, if you are interested to attend this session, while you'll take a deeper dive on how to find golden nuggets and great opportunities. So that's one of Navtaj's areas of expertise: distress owners, tax liens, power of sales, how to find great opportunities. So be sure to. Sorry. Okay. All right. July 13th. Moving on. Canada's rich getting richer. StatsCan reports with 90% of Canadian wealth in the hands of homeowners. So I'm going to say something controversial, and I'm going to say that this is fake news. This is a legitimate article, I'm sure, and it's recent too, June 13th. And it's true that people traditionally have made a lot of money in real estate. There's no question about it. Webinar. Somebody put their thing on mute, please. Thanks. Um, but in the last couple of years, in my opinion, people have been losing in real estate, especially speculators, anyone with a large portfolio. Um, they've been hurting. High interest rates has been causing a lot of damage. Prices to drop. People are having trouble financing. We'll see examples coming up later where people can't refinance. Power of sales are happening. So it's a kind of a general thing, you know. Don't wait to buy real estate. Buy real estate and wait. You know, I mean, that's kind of a general comment. But for that, I even listen, I haven't read the whole article, to be honest. This is just a headline. But that's my initial take on it. And anybody want to weigh in on this?
I would say it's the. Can you hear me? Sorry, David.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the political. I think that's a politically driven type of headline, in my opinion. I hope I don't cause too much arguments. I think that the Toronto Star likes to hold the line where the government is going to take on policy for housing, et cetera, and this just furthers that need, as opposed to acknowledging some of the, I guess, more real stories that we live through. So
Yeah.
that's what I.
Right. Not my favorite newspaper, Toronto Star, but hey, to each their own. It's only $1 a week. If you subscribe now, you can see the button on the top right. I think you'd do better off attending Navtaj's session this Saturday for $113 or whatever it was. Just my opinion. Okay, moving along. This is a very informative slide. And this basically would explain, I think, why condos especially are soft, and maybe we could get Randy Goodman to comment, but if people were buying condos willy-nilly, just thinking that they're going to go up forever, well, you know, the party never lasts forever. And with interest rates as high as they are, and prices as high as they are, you're basically going to have a negative cash flow. This looks at what the scenario is, assuming a single tenant property. Of course, that's a pretty high interest rate, 6.84%. But yeah, you know, condos, you've got maintenance fees and everything else. Randy, what are your thoughts?
You're absolutely right. you know, it all depends on how much someone's putting down on it and whether they're going to cash flow or not. So if they buy it all in cash, then yeah, they're going to cash flow even though they have maintenance costs. But if they're only putting down 5, 10, 20%, and they're carrying, and you'll know best, they're carrying a high mortgage every month, and they have to pay their maintenance fees. And some of these buildings have cheap maintenance fees if you're looking at the newer buildings, but if you're looking at the older buildings, a lot of them have over $1,000 a month in maintenance fees. That's a big hit to your monthly costs. So as an investor, it might not make sense unless you're able to buy it out and not carry a mortgage on it, or a minimal mortgage. Otherwise, it just might not make sense to you. And who better to help you with the calculations than your old friend David Grossman?
Well, thank you very much, my sister from another mister. We're going to
There
start
you go.
sounding like Naftash.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Well, that's why I've said, and I've done events, a couple of them in recent times about now taking advantage of opportunities to create multiple units out of a single family home, because at least that there's an opportunity there where there's pressure from the Ontario government to create more units, and you can create up to 3 units from a single family home. So with interest rates where they are, and they're certainly not 6.84% anymore, you can get mortgage money at around 5% or lower now in some cases. But still, you need to maximize your cash flow,
Mhm.
because it's hard work managing tenants, and there's a risk, and you got to deal with the landlord and tenant board. So you need to have a good plan, or you can also attend this Saturday and figure out how to get really good deals out there um, as well. Okay, moving on. Canada Infrastructure Bank. This is an interesting one. I'm going to ask Jerry if he would comment on this, and I'll tell you why. Because I know, Jerry, you have looked at in the past tiny home types of projects. We talk about infrastructure. Um, the cost to build housing is just so high. The slides coming up to talk about development charges. And the costs are just so high that even though we have this housing shortage, for builders to get things done in an expeditious fashion without having to pay through the nose, I mean, they can build, but people still can't afford $1 million houses. So, Jerry, you with me on this? Can we
Yeah,
go off the grid? I know there
yeah,
was a gentleman we had who was Jonathan Weaver. He had his own water treatment plant. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
we
Yeah.
got to get creative. What do you think,
Uh,
Jerry?
Well, I mean, yeah, we do need to get creative. I know that the one tiny home I've got a couple of tiny homes. The one we just put a big water tank on top of the shower, and we need to fill the water tank up every 2 or 3 weeks. So, you got to get creative. But this infrastructure bank kind of came from um, municipalities are trying to encourage building, obviously, intensification. They're trying to put as many homes as they can in as smaller areas. And they try to incentivize builders by either reducing or even canceling development fees. Well, those development fees are used to fund exactly this: roads, water, schools, so something had to give. So while some of these municipalities were incentivizing builders to come in with either reduced or eliminating development fees, that money had to come from somewhere, and that was kind of where the infrastructure bank came from. So yeah, I mean, listen, any funding source to build houses is welcome. The problem that most of us encounter is the red tape involved. That's my biggest beef is, it's great to have all these funding sources and these programs, but the paperwork involved, not only before, but during and the follow-up paperwork that's required in order for them to not retract your loan is very burdensome. So that's just my opinion. I mean, others seem to deal with that type of paperwork and structure a lot better than I do. So that's my
Yeah.
beat. You know, if
Well,
you
there is
know
a
it,
lot of
you
land.
know it.
There is a lot of land out there, and I think we need to start thinking more outside the box in terms of what can be done to create affordable housing and different types of communities, be they tiny home communities or what have you. They do exist. They
Yeah,
do
no, and
exist.
sorry, David, that's another purpose for this infrastructure bank is to provide infrastructure funding for areas that would otherwise not attract development money or infrastructure money. And you've mentioned tiny homes a couple of times, so I should take this opportunity to put a little plug in. This weekend in Ancaster is the Tiny Home Show, and I'm speaking at it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But if you've never been to a tiny home show, and if you're interested in tiny homes, this one is amazing. It's in Ancaster. I think it's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. There's probably 50, maybe not 50, but 30 or 40 tiny homes. It's at the fairgrounds. So there's like 30 or 40 tiny homes outside. They're incredible. They're amazing. And then inside they have a lot of the trade booths and vendors, and then there's an area for speakers. So anybody interested in tiny homes, it's a day well spent there to check out what's going on there. And they have these type of things too, sources for funding and financing. I know the last one I went to a month ago in Ottawa, a number of organizations looking for funding to fund their tiny home communities. And there's very creative approaches to that. There's just different ways of doing it, joint venturing. There's what's the word I'm looking for? Co-op ownership in these places. So you're right, David. We do need to think out of the box. We need to get creative. And a lot of these people, once they, again, what is the definition of a tiny home? Who really knows? But 300 or 400 square feet makes a decent living space, especially if you have outdoor space where a lot of your time is spent outside. I keep looking at these trailer parks and going, my God, there's a solution. A lot of them have their infrastructure in place. Just a matter of putting in year-round dwellings, and there you go. There's a solution. But
Yeah.
anyway, thought I'd throw
Well,
that.
I know also, I mean, at least CMHC has come to the table. So, if we're looking at sort of mainstream types of solutions as opposed to, your outside the box or off grid, where they're giving great incentives for builders to build affordable housing, energy efficient housing, and also accessible housing by offering up to 95% financing and 50-year amortization. So at least there's that. So there is some movement, but we do need to think more outside the box, and these kinds of events that you're talking about, Jerry, where people get together, exchange ideas, are important. Okay, so moving along, uh, this just kind of further drives home the point. Uh, Development charges for a single family home for over 20-year period. How did it go from $5,000 and change to about $47,000? It's craziness. So I think somebody's trying to fill up some tax deficits or government spending deficits by making them up on it seems to me what else it is other than taxation. So yeah, I think enough's been said on that. Um, More again. 1980 to 2024, $1,100 to $110,000. Not adding up. So there you have it. Canadian mortgage delinquency is expected to rise. Size of the debt and the length carried are two major factors. According to who is the source behind this? I can't recall. But anyhow, we have with house prices as high as they are, and the mortgages that go along with it, the amortizations are shorter than they once were. I remember probably 15, 20 years ago, we had 40-year amortizations. We were doing zero down mortgages with 40-year amortizations. And at this time, if it's less than 20% down mortgage, the maximum amortization is 25 years. There's a new thing coming out. Navtaj wanted me to talk about it. I'll get to it. I guess in my portion of the presentation on mortgages. For first-time buyers only on new construction, they'll go up to 30 years. But, it's with a conventional mortgage, 20% down, you can have a longer amortization. But amortizations are shorter now, and arguably they could be longer to improve affordability. But I guess these are considered red flags. Good for Howard, the licensed insolvency trustee. Turning to our panel now, would you invest in forfeited real estate? These properties. So you're going to learn about this if you attend NAV test session. Who would buy? Let's turn this up to the audience. If you were offered a good savings, good discount on real estate that were the proceeds of crime, would you buy that property? Here's a few examples. I don't know what the deals are, but I'd be interested in hearing from some of you, Vladimir or Ralph Canico or anybody else who's on. Would you buy a property that was proceeds of a crime property if it was a good deal?
Happy
Anyone?
to jump in, David. I'm happy
Go
to
ahead,
jump.
Jared.
Yeah, I couldn't care less where why the house is where it is. It's all about the numbers. Numbers need to make sense. So, what's our purchase price? Is it cap rate? The numbers need to make sense. And yeah, I would buy it all day long if the numbers make sense. So that's my comment. I couldn't care less why it's, why it's for sale the way it is.
Okay, so not a moral or ethical dilemma as far as you can see there, Jerry. Anybody else want to weigh in?
I remember Natasha always said, so it's not good idea. Sometimes they worse to buy property and destroy it and then build new one, or sometimes just put because sometimes it's you cannot sell because of the history.
Stigma.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's stigma property.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, I'm not sure what constitute, how one defines stigma. Certain things I think realtors are required to disclose in a listing, and certain things they're not. So, I mean, if there was a murder in a house, for example, that could affect your future marketability. I don't know. Randy, do you want to weigh in on this topic?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And it can definitely have an effect. And I know Teresa's had her hand up, so I want to let her have the floor. Take yourself
Teresa?
off mute, hon.
Yeah, all I was going to say is I remember Navtash talking about one where a family was actually murdered in it, and it still went for like I think maybe 300, 200 under market value. It still sold just because of the area that it was in, that it still went for. And then just to kind of add on to what Vladimir was saying is also what Navtaj has told us is that if there's been, depending on the criminal activity that went on, sometimes you're better off just buying it for the cost of the land, tearing down the house. That way, especially haunted houses, or anything like that, or people might believe it's haunted if there's been murders or something like that happening in the property. So it's really important to be able to acquire that property even as close to land value and then just restart it, because ghosts don't live in dirt. And that's the one thing that I had learned at one of NavTav's training. So thanks for the opportunity to share.
How do you know?
Yeah, how do we know where ghosts live?
Ghosts
Hello.
don't live in dirt. That's a good one. I like that.
Ralph,
Can
do
I
you
get
have
it?
a story with the property?
So generally speaking, we're attracted to stigmatized properties or properties that have a lot of hair on them because most investors, will shy away. One of the strategies that Nav talked about a few years ago was irrespective of the stigma attached to the house, with obviously the collateral support through the internet, reporting on properties of crime or criminal activity. The strategy that he suggested a few years ago, which we've used in some situations, is to change the address of the property. So in other words, if the property is sitting maybe on a corner, just looking at the way the numbers are lining up on the street, or you could take advantage of another street by simply changing the address to 4A or B or C, providing you get the municipal approval, eliminates any background information. So that kind of clears you away from lenders that are afraid of advancing on properties that could have a negative impact on their loans in the event of a default.
A great idea.
Interesting. Thanks, Ralph.
You're welcome.
Okay, moving along. Breach of contract, Cambridge collapse, 2022. After numerous extensions walked away, seller launched a $2.3 million for breach of contract. Well, we see this kind of thing happening where, people are buying properties and they don't want to close or they can't close, and there's lawsuits. So that's a fact of life now. That's something we're seeing on a regular basis. So I don't know if if anyone has any personal experience on this, but I deal with I get some mortgage referrals from somebody who works at a builder's office and sells a lot of new construction. And they're seeing this all the time. People are either choosing not to close or they can't close, they don't want to close. For one reason, if you bought a house for 1.7 million or whatever the price is, and it's now worth a lot less, you can try and close and invest every last penny you have and take a crazy mortgage, or you can try and walk away and you risk getting sued. So I would say try and talk to the builder or the seller and come up with something if circumstances change. That can also happen on an existing home where the market drops considerably in a short period of time, and from the time you buy it to the time you have it appraised 60 days later, there can be a change of value which can impact your ability or desire to close. Anybody want to weigh in on this one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I will.
Sorry.
Go ahead. You go ahead.
Unfortunately, thank you. Unfortunately, what's happening is people have booked with the builders during the times that the prices were high in 2022. And now when it's time to close, the property prices have fallen, the mortgage rates are high, and the unfortunate situation is they're not even being approved for the mortgage. So they don't really have a choice. They're having to walk away from the contract. It is a breach of contract, and a lot of them are getting sued by the builders, which is again very unfortunate because it's really not a fault of the purchaser, but it's just the circumstances. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jyoti.
You're
Randy?
welcome.
Yeah. Um, you know, similar to what Jyoti was saying, it's not necessarily anyone's fault, but the market has dropped so much. I have a client who purchased a townhouse condo in, well, it was still high price. The developers hadn't come down yet in their pricing from COVID. And actually, none of the developers were adjusting their prices according to the market. And, I had a client who purchased property, and then when they went to go to interim occupancy, which means that the developer expects the buyer to pay a certain amount of rent, which is calculated near that time, in order to take temporary possession before the property actually closes. So it could close 6 months to a year after that, because as they finish each floor, they have to wait till the whole building's done so that they can close. Uh, in that period, you're supposed to pay this rent to the developer, which could include cap fees and whatnot and levies. And it was over $7,000, like, a month. It's crazy. So they either forfeit and lose their deposit, or they go into it. But if you do forfeit your deposit, the developer can still come after you because you did enter a contract. So even though it doesn't make logical sense, the problem is that they did enter a contract. And legally, we know you're stuck in a contract no matter what the numbers are. So, and it's not like we can predict the future. We can't say, oh, the prices were going to come down or how much they were going to come down. We had no idea. You could, guess that might happen, or it might come down a little bit, but I don't think anybody expected it to come down as much as it did. So people can be in a lot of trouble, and unfortunately they get burnt from it. So it's, again, buyer beware and be careful of the market, and, what the market can do, what the market changes can be. So when you see prices shooting up 20-30% really quickly, you want to use a little bit of logic when you're jumping into that market, what your intended use is, what your goals are. Are you going to hold on to this property? Like, really be clear about what the numbers could be. Talk to your mortgage broker, your accountant, and make sure that the numbers are still going to make sense regardless what's happening in the market.
Thank you, Randy.
David, I have a comment on that, if I can.
Sure, Jerry.
Are these the same developers that are suing people for not closing? Are they the same developers that years ago when people did pre-construction and by the time they closed, their places were worth twice as much as the purchase price? Are these the same developers that wouldn't let people close because there's too much value built in? You know what I'm talking about, Randy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
For those that don't, many years ago, people would put their money down on a pre-construction, and by the time it closed, it doubled in value. And the sneaky developers, builders would either just say, sorry, we're not closing, here's your deposit back. Or you want to still buy this thing, you're going to pay another $100,000 to buy this thing. So I don't know if they're the same developers, David. I think they are.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the developers probably have lawyers at their disposal. They can make moves, whereas individual private owners who maybe stepped out to buy up one or two properties may not have the same resources, and they can get taken advantage of. You'd think if you have a contract to close, um, you should be able to close for that price, and you risk getting the developer too would risk getting sued. But what's the ability of the individual purchaser to take that to fruition? I can tell you where I live up here in Wasaga Beach. There's a developer builder who lately, for people who bought these townhouses in an area close to where I live, they bought them for like $300,000 about 7 years ago. And of course, it was nothing but one delay after the other. And now these townhouses are finally ready. And of course, they're worth about $600,000 now. So the builder is doing everything that they can to trip up the buyers so that they won't be able to close on time. And if they're one day late, that's it. You're done. You've just lost your deposit and a potential $300,000 profit because you couldn't close on time. They're giving them the shortest notice possible for everything, dragging their heels. You tell them you're planning to live in it, they'll say, no, we don't believe you. We're charging you the HST. You'll get your HST back from the government. Well, I don't have the cash. Too bad. You got 24 hours to come up with it. If you don't close on time, you're done. And some people have lost the opportunity for a quick $300,000 profit as a result. So yeah, buyer beware. Talk to your professionals. Make sure your ducks are in a row. Don't let these things drag. Jyoti, I don't know if you had a specific topic for
Yes,
today.
I do. It is
Okay. We
connected to
can't
the
see
topic.
you we can't see you, by the
Oh,
way. I just see the
sorry.
lights on your ceiling.
Okay, can you see me now?
I can see, yes, we can see you now.
Okay. Yeah, my topic is closely connected to what we have been talking about so far. That is a breach of contract. In fact, when you were mentioning about the builders, not giving enough time, enough notice to close the deal, I had an experience recently with one of my clients who had been sent a letter of default by the builders, but the builders law, obviously, and I was able to, revive the agreement and close it for them, which was something very satisfying for me. And yeah, the purchasers were very, very thankful. They saved a good $200,000-$300,000 because the contract was still valid and they could get into the home that they wanted to get into. But that is besides the point. I just wanted to mention it. My topic is what is a breach of contract and what are the consequences of a breach of contract. Now, everybody knows what a contract is and everybody knows what a breach of contract is. Basically, it's a breach of contract is a violation of any of the agreed upon terms and conditions of a binding contract. So if you have a binding contract with the builder or with the seller of a used property, you sign on the dotted line, you have taken out all the, given the waivers and taken out all the inspection and financing conditions, and the contract is firm, it is a binding contract and you cannot get out of it. And if you do something which breaches the contract, then you're in trouble. A broken contract is really serious business. It is binding between two or more parties, and a breach can result in all kinds of penalties, such as civil penalties, including monetary fines, legal fees, and also the inconvenience of being sued and having to participate in civil proceedings. So if we were to discuss the consequences of a breach of contract, these could include damages to compensate the business for the financial losses, just like the builders are trying to get out of the unfortunate purchasers who are not able to close. They are trying to sue them for the financial losses and whatever else, the damages. It could also mean specific performance to ensure that the obligations are still performed. So the court may say the contract still is valid and all the obligations have to be performed. Or it could even say that the contract is terminated and the commercial relationship is terminated altogether. So there are various scenarios. The court can rule in whichever direction it feels that the evidence is heavily leaning in favor of, sorry. And the other thing is a breach of contract can be small or large. Like you can have a small breach of contract, it doesn't mean that you don't get penalized for it. But even if there's a late payment or a late shipment, it could qualify as a breach of contract. If the other party can prove that damages occurred because of the breach, like lost income or a missed deadline, they may have grounds for a lawsuit. So, I mean, everything does not qualify for legal action. Minor breaches may not qualify for legal proceedings, and as the damage done may not be significant, and you may not want to get into suing somebody and incurring a lawyer's fees if your damage is too small, and paying the lawyer's fees, or going ahead with the civil proceedings may be more expensive. So if it's a minor breach, and the lawyer will always advise you it's not worth suing. But if it's a major breach, that means that a significant part of the agreement is not honored. And the majority of civil proceedings that occur over a broken contract are concerned with a major breach of contract. So that is the time when it qualifies for legal action. And you have to prove certain elements. You have to show in a civil court that a breach of contract occurred and that measurable damages were incurred as a direct result of the broken contract. It doesn't matter if the intention is not there, it could be accidental, but it still means that there are grounds for legal action. And the most common penalty that arises for a civil lawsuit of a breach of contract is monetary in nature. For example, the party that failed to fulfill their obligations may have to pay damages in the form of a fine. So basically, anytime any person breaches a contract, he's in for penalties. He has to pay fines. And these penalties and fines can fall into two categories: legal remedies and equitable remedies. So legal remedies are basically a form of monetary compensation for damages which are ordered by the court. And the common types include compensatory damages, nominal damages, or liquidated damages or penalties. Now, equitable remedies are awarded when the legal remedies don't suffice to resolve the situation. And equitable remedies include specific performance. That means the court may say, no, the contract has to be completed. There has to be specific performance. Or there can be an injunction to stop something, or, to stop somebody from taking a particular course of action. And there could also be rescission, which means the contract can be decided. So, which means it can be declared null and void. So the equitable remedies don't aim at financial compensation for damages, but what they do is they aim to compel the breaching party to perform a necessary action, cease an action, or otherwise provide resolution to the situation arising from the broken contract. Now, I know every time somebody breaks a contract, it's a serious matter, but all the same, if you're being sued for a breach of contract, there are some defenses which can be available to you in court. So situations that may justify a breach contract include fraud, illegal contracts, mutual mistakes, duress, unconscionable contracts, and incapacity. For example, if one party is a minor or mentally incapable of signing binding contracts, and unclean hands, meaning both parties committed some wrongdoing. So, I mean, it is serious matter if there's a breach of contract and you are the party who has breached the contract. But if you get hold of a good lawyer and you have a justification, then you have a defense for the breach. And probably a good lawyer can put forward the defense, and you may be saved of heavy penalties and, other damages. So that's my take for today. I hope that was informative.
It was informative. Thank you very much, Jyoti. Friends, please take a snapshot, make a note of Jyoti's contact information. You definitely want to be in touch with her before things go downhill. Keep your lawyer and all your professionals in the loop if you're involved in a real estate transaction.
Thank you,
So that
David.
you, thanks a lot, Jyoti. Now I
You're
got a
welcome.
text earlier from Navtaj that was joining us today. Ralph, is it Ralph Cannon?
Yeah, canonical, but canon's fine.
Canonical.
Yeah.
I haven't seen you in a while. It's nice to see you. Tell us what's new in your world. What do you want to talk to us about today?
Okay, nice to be here. A couple things we've been dealing with. I got like I've got two scenarios that are kind of confusing, and okay, let me start by saying we understand, the seller's rights to enforce, right, a contract, whether it be, selling something or there's a default on closing. But lately, I've had situations with clients that are borrowers. And the question I'm getting from most of them is what strategies, tools can I use to prolong a default and avoid a seizure of their property? So I'm used to the standard question of, a defense under a claim for possession and demand for the money, and forbearance agreements. But is there anything else that a borrower, has in their toolbox that can push off a lender for as long as possible in order for them to recover their position and/or, retain the rights, the bundle of rights with the property to capitalize on the potential equity that, in their perception, is being robbed? So that's my first question.
Well, that's a very good question. Well, is that a question for me or is that a question to the
No,
group?
anyway, maybe Jyoti can answer that. I can add to that in some cases where the lender has been underhanded with respect to sliding in standby fees, late penalties, inspection fees, et cetera, that were never originally part of the mortgage. These are private lenders, by the way. Have used, I just heard this week, a legal argument under, he named it the ex parte motion, that basically, the way it was explained to me is that they bypass the arguing party, including the opposition lawyer, and go directly to a judge in order to obtain either a stay order or potentially setting down a date for trial. I'm not sure, or maybe a mediation or arbitration process. That's something that, if you can shed some light on the power of that motion, how it would work in for a borrower trying to defend their, losing their property.
Well, this seems more like a summary judgment situation, because sometimes what happens with the courts is if either of the lawyers is able to prove, either the plaintiff's lawyer or the defendant's lawyer is able to prove that there is no triable issue and it does not need to go to trial, then they bring a motion for a summary judgment. So this, I'm guessing, is something very similar, and the courts would allow it if there was no real issue which needed a full-fledged trial.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so with respect to, delay tactics from a borrower side, as opposed to the enforcement of a lender, how can the borrower defend himself against the lender that is obviously trying to loan to own a property, making it very difficult for the borrower to survive default.
From what I have seen in my personal experiences, even when they start the power of sale proceedings, they put in statement of claim in the court and it's filed in the court. It is still a long time before the matter, the property is actually sold, and the homeowners lose the property. So there are various ways in which they can save the property. Of course, everybody, or rather you would be aware of the redemption period. So when they can pay off whatever they owe and they can save the property, or even otherwise, the court process does take long, and they have the time to organize themselves, bring the funds in, and try and save the property by whatever means they have at their disposal.
Mm-hmm. Lately, some of these borrowers have been bypassing the Superior Court process and going to, the commercial list route.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, they've been able to, stall or have the lender stand still. Yeah, again, buying more and more time, even though it would be considered frivolous. But the arguments that these borrowers are presenting have stalled lenders from, taking further action pending, hearings. I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to see, like, a borrower cannot be defenseless when you're up against an unscrupulous lender or their representatives. And I must have a half a dozen cases like this where people are on the cusp of losing assets, and they're vigorously fighting, to stall the proceedings and or get into forbearance agreements. And in some cases, the forbearance agreements they've also defaulted on them, and then go back and for a small fee will renegotiate another forbearance agreement. So are there any other tools other than maybe fraud or unfair practices that a borrower can allege in order to continue to stall the process for a lender to monetize their receivable?
Well, like you mentioned, fraud is defense for the borrower if there is fraud in it. Or I'm not very sure if humanitarian grounds would qualify as a defense for a borrower. It does in immigration cases, but in these cases, I don't know. I haven't heard of it. But the situation being what it is, with the mortgage rates so high, and second mortgages are not being paid by a lot of homeowners because they're barely able to make the payments on the first one. And if the second lender wants to bring in power of sale proceedings, they're still not going to get the money back because their home is not worth what it was when the money was lent. So they will have to give the first mortgagee all the money that they asked for, and there is nothing left for the second lender. So I think it's not a delay tactic, but it is a practical problem that second mortgagees are having with respect to borrowers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, I have. If anybody wants to ask me questions about these defaulting borrowers that are trying to defend themselves, let me know, or I can move on to the next question.
Well, I mean, one thing I'm wondering about, I mean, I know there's complicated loans, construction loans, where there's a lot of terms that need to be met, for example. But you would think that in the case of a straightforward loan, that if the borrower pays on time, keeps the property insured and taxes up to date, that they run the risk of losing the property to an unscrupulous lender is pretty low if they keep track of their payments and document their attempts to pay the mortgage on the due date.
I just, you're absolutely right. I just find that some of the people that we're representing or are attempting to represent when they present their case, I think are using, questionable strategies or creating a lot of smoke and mirror to put the lender in a black, in a negative position in terms of his perception, right? And they'll, instead of making payments, they'd rather use the legal system to delay as long as possible while they're trying to monetize the asset without, carrying the debt load. Notwithstanding that, assuming that the mortgage is legit and the meter's still running and all the costs are mounting, they hope to outrun the lender, by creating distance between the money being due and hopefully monetizing it at a profit later. We have a bunch of builders that have bought land that have come to us, and the valuation has come down, and now they're using the strategy of whatever they can muster up in order to or they're registering CPLs on properties without closing. They're trying to go to court in an effort to get price reductions on the land. So I'm kind of looking at it from the other side. When they come and they're in default and they're looking for a refi, and if there's like a clear, it's a clear cut. It's a clear cut default because of non-payment or not meeting the conditions of the loan. They're sitting there very cool in the room. There's millions of dollars at stake on some of these commercial properties, and you know what? They're just strategizing a legal strategy to buy. In one particular case, he's been able to stall, a lender over a year. It's got to be like 14 months. And are there any other means other than the forbearance that potentially, other than litigation, could just stall a lender from seizing the property? I don't know.
Well, I'll give you a call if you're interested. Perhaps we can talk about it tomorrow. But maybe now, for the sake of time, you have a second topic you wanted to discuss?
Yeah, along with some of these defaults, there's obviously a number of receivership sales. And we have a situation, again, with like Jody was saying, a second mortgagee on a property he's a secured lender. And the first is obviously secured, and then all the unsecureds and the rights of the borrower have all evaporated as a result of the court order to sell it. And these clients, in this particular case, the second lender was the winning bid on the offer. And obviously, after the vesting order, there was a closing date. So as they're moving towards the closing, and the deposit was paid, the deal got shaky for the buyer because of circumstances that were beyond their control, and couldn't pay out the first. So to make a long story short, they defaulted. Their response to the default was that the trust that he had been negotiating secretly with the first mortgage lender, and as a result of that collusion, which was expanded to include the trustee, he still has rights under that default to continue with the land. And we've got other clients that wanted to step in and obviously, buy the land first, as opposed to, assuming a second charge on the property. So again, I guess the question is there a case after a default on a winning bid, after the receiver has got a vesting order from a buyer, that in the event of a default, that their deal is still alive and they can continue to attempt to close because of the negotiations they're doing with the secured lender?
Is that a question?
Jyoti, you have any comments?
Well, I haven't dealt with this kind of a scenario, so I would rather not comment on it because it would just be my opinion, and it would be better not to express an opinion, if I don't have the facts in front of me.
There's obviously lots to this commotion, and it's a finite. Basically, on the default, all bets are off, and the next buyers, you call back the bidders from before, lost, and they're re-invited to bid. while the defaulting party is negotiating with the lenders, the secured lenders, and still having a right to purchase the property under their original agreement, is I'm finding like difficult to comprehend, because usually a contract should be respected, right? And there's a lot of language in the receiver's offers that basically terminate all parties once that default closing date hasn't been met.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Right.
Go ahead, Jyoti.
The closing date has to be met irrespective of default. I mean, irrespective of other circumstances, unless there is an extension in place that is granted by the seller or the authorities trying to sell the property. So the closing date is not movable without consent of the selling party. So that is a given. And only with consent can it be moved or extended further. The rest of the factors are variables which are dependent on each particular situation. A lot of times the sellers grant extensions, including some builders. They're good enough to grant an extension at times. And then the contract is brought to a logical conclusion and it is successfully completed.
Okay, we need to move on, and I think Ralph, you put your phone. Somebody put Ralph's number there. If you want to put your phone number there, Ralph, and maybe you can continue this conversation with Jyoti after the meeting.
Sure.
So we need to move along for time's sake. Okay, I don't know the details of this, so I'm not going to comment on it. For the sake of time, I'm going to move along now. We still need to hear from Jerry, and we need to hear from Randy. So Randy, what do you have for us today?
So Navtaj had touched on picking up power of sale properties and whether, what the effects are and whether you should pick up a power of sale property. So power of sale properties mean that the owner has defaulted on the property somehow, or for some reason, and the lender has taken back the property. Now in Ontario and some other provinces, what happens is they have to sell it at market rate. They don't get to sell it cheap. They have to sell it at market rate. And if they have an overage of what they were owed, so if they were owed 100,000, the property is 300,000, that 200,000 can go back to the owner of the property. And then there's some provinces where that doesn't happen. So is it worth buying a power of sale property? A lot of people have the perception that they think they're going to get a deal, and actually legally they have to sell it at market rate. So you may or may not get a better deal, but just know that they do legally have to sell it at market rate or at the best rate they could possibly get for that property. So I wanted to touch on that. And then there was another topic. Okay, I'll just go to stats for the month. So our sales are down June to June, so our June numbers are out. June 2024 versus 2023. Am I able to show my screen here?
I could probably, yeah. let's see if I can add you as a co-host.
It's okay. It's okay. I'll
You're
just,
co-host now, so I don't know if you can try and share your screen. Go ahead if you
oh,
like.
yep. Okay. Thank you. Okay. And okay, first you're going to see you, and tell me if you see Market Watch.
Yes,
You guys see Market Watch?
yes,
Okay.
yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. Okay, awesome. So in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the year-over-year summary. Sales this year versus last year, this is for the month of June, are down 16%. New listings are up a bit, and the average price is just about the same, which it has been pretty steady. And days on market, it's sitting on the market a little bit longer. But if you look in the middle section, you can see the year over year change with like detached versus semi versus town and condo apartment. So what we can see is condo apartments, and I know people have heard in the market that condos are taking a big hit. Well, in the 416 and the 905 areas, you've got a huge decline in sales for condo apartments in the GTA and the 905s. It's a huge hit. Even though the prices are about the same, the amount of sales happening have decreased drastically. So if that puts the market into perspective a little bit, detached, it's down, but it's not terrible. Semi-detached aren't doing so well in the 416s either. And then townhouses are down from last year as well. But you can see the average price is for the detached homes, it's down in the 905s. It's down for semi-detached overall. Townhouses in the 905s are taking a bigger hit. Of course, the condo apartments aren't doing a heck of a lot, period. And then month over month, sorry, let's go back here. We'll just go down here. So you still see my page, right?
Yeah, can you make it bigger though? It's hard. It's very hard to see the numbers.
Yeah, I could make it bigger. Whoops. A little too big. Okay.
Better.
Does that
Yeah,
help?
that's
Okay.
yeah.
So month over month, we can see in January. So these are the sales, and the middle column is the sales, and the right column is the prices. Now, you can see from January 2024, they're going up. They came down a little bit in June as far as the number of properties that sold. But you can see the sales prices, the average price has been gradually going up. It kind of steadied out in June, came down a teeny weeny little bit, but we also had less number of sales as well. So, you know, you may still be hearing about, I'll stop sharing, but you may still be hearing about some multiple offers going on, and there are some areas where there's multiple offers going on, or they're doing offer presentations and people are still fighting for properties. Of course, we had the reduction in the basis points for the mortgages by 25 points. We'll have another one coming up July 24th, I believe. So we'll see if it comes down again. It's not a huge drastic change for people to go, oh yeah, I'm going to go crazy in the market now. But it is definitely going in the right direction. Probably people would want to see like a point difference in order to be really going crazy back in the market. But People are buying. There's a lot of listings out right now. There's a lot of activity. Of course, summertime is a slower time for people, but it's also a great time to get into the market because you wouldn't have as much competition. And yeah, if anybody has any questions about the market or about a property and you want a comparable on it, happy to share that information. If you have general questions, you can connect with me offline because I know we are crammed for time right now, but happy to answer any questions that anyone has and help you figure out the numbers. I work with my son who went to accounting and finance course and loves to work with the numbers too. And of course, you can always reach out to Jerry as well on numbers. And
Jerry
happy
is your
to chat.
son, I guess. Jerry is your
David?
son. He works with
No,
you. Jerry is your son, or
no, David's my son.
Yeah, oh, okay.
David's my son. Jerry's too old to be my son.
I'm young. I'm just young. I could be your son. It just depends how early you start, Randy.
There you go. There
Okay,
you
thank
go.
you very much, Randy. Take a snapshot for friends of Randy's contact information and give her a call. She will help
Thank
you
you.
out for sure. Thank you very much, Randy. So Tax Freedom Day, Navtaj mentioned this before, and I think my solution was basically that you don't do any work until June 13th, and that way you can avoid this problem. No, this just drives home the point of how much we pay in taxes. And it's a lot. So you definitely need to have a good accountant. Very high taxes, and it's getting worse. Here's some of the federal tax rates. We've got a provincial taxes. It's a graduated tax system, of course, and you've got Ontario taxes. You've got federal taxes, and I guess it's the 80-20 rule or the 62.7% rule. The top earners are paying the lion's share of the taxes, and I think that's part of the reason we have what some people call the brain drain. A lot of the talent goes south to where they're going to pay less tax. And how to avoid tax, Jerry? What have you got for us today? And there was a question for you, by the way, in the comment. Did you see it? It was about holding real estate in a trust versus
Okay, well,
if you. I'm not sure if you saw that in the chat.
let me look at the question and let me say thank you. Welcome all my Navtaj friends out there. Appreciate the time. What was this question? The question was,
Should we make Gurvinder asked, should we make trust or corporation for investment properties? Which is better?
okay, so in a general comment, we need to think that there are three entities that we deal with: a person, a corporation, and a trust. And only a person and a corporation can actually own property, whereas a trust can hold property in trust for a person or a corporation. So we got to wrap our heads around that. We also need to wrap our heads around that, at least in my world as an accountant. I deal with the balance sheet over here and the income statement over here. And the balance sheet is about assets and liabilities. So where do we want to own the asset? And the income statement side is where do we want to pay the tax, or where do we, where is the most favorable, what is the most favorable entity, person, corporation, or trust to pay the tax. So on one side, we got the balance sheet of our life, and that applies to everybody. Everybody has the balance sheet of their life and the income statement side of their life. So we always look at where do we want to hold the asset and what is the most tax favorable entity to pay the tax of any income that we earn. So when the question is, should I set up a corporation? Should I set up a trust? There's not enough information there for me to answer that question, because everybody's situation is dependent upon their own circumstance. I will say on a trust, Okay, again, balance sheet income statement. When we pay tax in a trust, an inter vivos trust is a trust that we set up while we're alive. A testamentary trust is a trust that's created upon our death. So an inter vivos trust, i.e., we set up a trust in our lifetime, that has a 50% tax rate, 50. Okay, so there is no tax benefit as far as flowing income into a trust. Okay, we do with a trust, because it's really just a conduit, we can flow income through a trust into the hands of either a person or a corporation. So that's more the income. So the tax bracket in a trust is very unfavorable. Where we do use a lot of trusts is for protecting assets. Even though I'm not a lawyer, we're an accountant. I'm an accountant, but trusts are used if people are, if we talk about estate planning, transferring assets through for one generation to another. Again, we're on the balance sheet of someone's life. Trusts have some value there. Another area where we use a lot of trusts is to utilize the capital gains exemption, which is now up to 1.2 million. And what, for those that don't know, there is a 1.2 million capital gains exemption that only applies on certain items. And the most common one is the sale of your share of your company. So let's hypothetically say we have a company and it's worth $5 million, and we have a husband, wife, and 2 kids. We got 4 kids, each of them have 1.2. There's a benefit to create a trust structure where the sale of those shares could flow through the trust into the hands of those 4 entities, and each entity uses their 1.2 capital gain exemption. So again, just in summary on a trust, we don't use trusts for an advantage tax into income, tax on income. So they're more balance sheet structuring. Again, whether it's a corporation or a trust, we would need more information. And interestingly enough, this being the first session since the June 25th tax change about the capital gains, and I'm sure most of you know what I'm talking about, but if you don't, on June 25th, they changed the what we call capital gains inclusion rate. Okay, so if you have whatever your capital gain is, you have to include so much of it into income. Prior to June 25th, it was 50%. June 25th, the rules changed. Now, if you're a corporation, if that asset is held in the corporation, and then there's a sale and there's a capital gain, we have to include 2/3 of that gain as income. Again, on a personal capital gain, they've allowed a person to own up to $250,000 a year as a capital gain with only the 50% inclusion rate. So back to the question, again, I can't answer that without more information, but since that budget day of June 25th, we do lean a little tiny bit more. There's some advantages to holding that property personally, because the first $250,000 on a sale will be, we only have a 50% inclusion rate. But the plot thickens, it gets more complicated. It also depends what your marginal tax bracket is. We just saw a slide, I think if I remember it, 20% of the people in Canada are paying tax at 54%. So if you're one of those 20%, do we really want to hold that property personally? So when you sell it, even though we have a 50% inclusion rate, we're still putting that on your tax return at 54%. So lots of moving parts. There is no one answer that fits everybody's circumstance. But again, with this new budget, there is a little benefit to holding the assets personally. But I caution you, when you are looking at these situations, remember who you're asking, okay? You should be asking an accountant and you should be asking a lawyer. A lawyer is there to protect you from liability. So obviously a corporation is a very good entity to protect you from liability. A trust is even a better entity to protect you from liability. I'm the tax guy. So you're asking me, how do I structure this to save, to minimize my tax? Okay, so we look at it really not from a liability point of view. We look at it from a tax angle. So there's lots of times where a lawyer might say, oh my God, yes, set it up in a corporation. And an accountant might say, well, no, there's some tax benefits to hold that personally. And we're both right. So it's about gathering information, being educated, and making the decision based on the information you've received from professionals in your circle. So that's a long-winded way of answering a question that really doesn't have an answer. But anyway, there was a couple other things I wanted to talk about. CRA is, I've been in tax for 40 years now, and I have never, ever, ever seen CRA worse than they are now as far as audits. They are auditing everybody for anything. And it's not just me. I belong to a circle of about 350 accountants. That's our network. We talk every day, communicate every day. All of us are complaining about the number of audits that CRA is conducting. And, I could talk about this for an hour, but I would like to talk about one area that relates to us as real estate investors. And that is, as I've said before, when we look at the income side of our equation, and for real estate investors, when we have real estate properties, we have gross rent minus expenses equals net rent income, assuming we have net rent income. That net rent income has to go on a tax return. If we own that property personally, that net rent income will land on our personal tax return. And depending on what marginal tax bracket we're in, that will determine how much tax we pay. If we own the property in the corporation and we have net rent income, that's passive income taxed at 50%. Okay, so that's not very good. And normally what we would do in that circumstance, if a building is held in a corporation and we have what I call a net rent income problem, meaning we have net rent income, we don't want to pay 50%, we would set up a second corporation and we would call that a real estate management corporation. And let's call that corporation number 2. So corporation number 1 is the one that holds the real estate. It has net rent income. We don't want to pay 50%. So a lot of times we'll transfer that net rent income into that management company, because rental management is what we call active corporate income, and that's tax paid at 12%. So that's a strategy we use a lot. That number that we move over from corporation 1 to corporation 2, it has to be reasonable. Okay, we just can't pull numbers out of the air that suit our tax return. There has to be some justification. What number we use, and CRA would say, what would you normally pay a third-party property manager? Would you pay them 10%, 15%? So we have to be somewhat reasonable. So what's happening now is CRA is auditing this stuff quite a lot. And what they're looking for is, when we do this stuff, they're going, okay, where's the management contract between company 2 and company 1? Show me the contract that both of those corporations have signed. Corporations are separate legal entities. And we scramble, and maybe we make up a contract and get them to sign it and send it to CRA, and then they go, okay, so where is the money transfer from holding corp to management corp? We don't even see any money going across from corp 1 to corp 2. So we have to be a little more careful in our structuring and how we do these things, and the things that we put in place to be what we call much more audit compliant today than ever in the past, because they are turning over every stone looking for money from anybody. So, be careful when we're doing these structures, make sure we can support that in an audit. Do you want me to keep going, David, or is my time cut out a bit?
Well, let me just do a time check here. It's 8:42. So, can you take one more minute to wrap it up, or?
Yeah, no, I'll wrap it up. The other thing, just quickly, non-real estate related, but certainly tax audit related. The curb, the curb stuff, that the money they gave out is finally filtering through the system, and they're auditing once again a lot of people. I've had so many clients that literally getting these reassessments and saying you owe all this curb back, even though they qualified under the correct criteria for this. And it's just a nightmare for us as accountants trying to convince CRA that these clients do not have to repay this money given the qualification criteria at the time they received this money. So just hopefully if you did collect CURB or CRB, and if you haven't got any audit notices, you're lucky. So just be on your toes. They seem very active over there at CRA. So other than that, thank you very much, David. You're doing a great job hosting this thing tonight, and good to see everybody again. And my contact information is in the chat. Feel free to reach out if you got any tax questions or issues or structures.
Thanks very much, Jerry. Much appreciated. Information, interesting as always. Take a snapshot or write and make a note of Jerry's phone number there, friends, and give him a call. He'll help you out. Looks like the government, these COVID times of throwing money at people, these days are over, and they're looking for their pound of flesh, as it were. Interesting slide here. You know, we talk about how high mortgage rates are. Well, look how they were back from 1975 on the left-hand side. 5-year rates from 1975 down to the bottom left, starting from 11.5%, consistently over 10%, and then well over 10% in 1982, close to 20. People complain about high mortgage rates today. Of course, house prices are much higher. Back in 1975, you could probably buy a house for $30,000 or $50,000. But I guess the job of our government is to avoid a bloodbath and to keep everybody afloat to the extent possible. Here's the schedule of interest rate cuts and announcements. We've had our first cut last month, and I think we are probably up for another cut. The experts are saying that this month there is roughly a 2/3 probability of a further cut. A lot of renewals going to be coming up, many more in as the years pass, and if you're on a variable rate, you may not be so dramatically affected if your payment's been going up. If you're on a variable rate with a fixed payment, when your mortgage matures, you could have a big bill and some serious payment shock. So the target is to bring rates down. I would say there's a good chance they're going to come down. Well, the target is to bring them down by about 2 percentage points, 2 full percentage points. We just don't know how long that's going to take. And what else was I going to say? We think that the market will start picking up once rates have dropped by about 3/4 of a point to a point. As they come down a quarter point, and it's not enough to really impact things. I mean, there's a little bit more positive feeling out there, I think. There seems to have been more activity in recent weeks than there were, let's say, in the first half of the year, at least from my perspective. The thought is that things will pick up once rates drop by a total of about 3/4 of a point to a full point. And there are some bets that we're going to see 2 or 3 more decreases this year. The unemployment figures were up. I never thought I'd say good news, more unemployment, but we need signs of a weakening economy to get the Bank of Canada to really take a little bit more aggressive action in reducing rates. And it seems like inflation is still more or less under control. So I think there's a good chance we'll see some further rate reductions coming up. Top 2 tips: always talk to your experts, whether it's mortgage related or anything else. Navtaj has a great cast of experts here. They've all shared their ideas and their contact information. So don't hesitate to give them a call. And thanks to all of you who've contributed your ideas today and questions. Let's see if there's any further questions before we wind up. Show the chart with the dates again. Yes, sure, Donna. I shall do that. The chart with the dates again. Let us see. Here it is. The chart with the dates again. There you have it. The Bank of Canada meets 8 times a year. And so there's an opportunity for a few more rate reductions still this year. Hello, everyone. Glad to join. If government admits about recession, how do you see the market play out? Real estate and stock market. Well, I don't know. Does anybody want to comment on that? A question by Bob. If the government officially admits recession, how do you see the market play out? Real estate and stock market. Anybody want to weigh in on that one? Okay, so we don't have any takers on that. I don't know. Are we in an official recession, or I don't think we are. What's the definition of an official recession? You have to see reduced growth or negative growth for a certain number of quarters. Are we there yet? Gurwinder, are you raising your hand?
I don't think we're quite there yet. We'll probably know by the end of the year. Let's see how these rates settle, right? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah. So we're not quite there. That's what I thought. We're not quite there. And obviously the government would like to avoid a recession. Yeah. Thank you, Gurwinder. Thanks for that. Appreciate that. So thanks everybody for joining us. And thanks Navtaj for giving me the opportunity to host today. And we'll hope to talk to you over the coming days. And if not, we'll see you next month. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, David. See you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks for hosting, David.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
David, good night.
Thanks so much. Good night.